So I literally just finished the episode with Adam and Justin from Health Launchpad, who, when it comes to marketing in B2B health, getting tech into providers, they're the masters. And I'm about to sit down and update my CRM with some new strategies and update some of my marketing language based on the conversation that we had. So stick around for this episode. You're probably about to do the same thing. Anyway, I'll let Adam and Justin tell a little bit about their background from being in the provider side and also launching a health software company with no background in health at all. Adam, let's start a little bit with your background, because you came from not necessarily a marketing background specifically, but into a C-suite of your own company. Break it down. Give me a couple minutes of Adam before Health Launchpad.
Yeah. So my career's sort of got 3 chapters to it. The longest chapter actually was a couple of decades in various roles at sort of some big agencies. So I started at Ogilvy and Mather, as it was there, sort of classic agency, back in the sort of advertising days, or sort of the very late stage of Mad Men. But most of it was actually spent in the growth of digital marketing. And I worked in pretty much every single industry except for healthcare. And then the second chapter was I kind of accidentally started a healthcare technology business. My good friend, who is a physician, and I were doing some communication consulting advisory work with a hospital. And we thought, I wonder if there's an app for this. We were driving back from a conference and he was driving and I had a notepad out, and we just said, well, it could have this button on it and that button on it, and it could do this, it could do that. But end of the day, it was all about communications and improving communication within the healthcare system. And so we then pitched that to the CEO of a healthcare system. And he said, you build that, I'll buy it. So we went out, we hired some developers, we self-funded, we bootstrapped the company. And that then lit the fuse on a 7-year journey to build up a health tech company where we raised some money. We sold the system into probably about 50 hospitals, I think, at the time, and some big healthcare systems and some little hospitals as well. And eventually we just decided that we either needed to raise a lot more money than we were going to be able to do, or it was time to get out. So we decided to sell the company. We sold the company to a company called Harris Healthcare back in 2019. And I thought, I'm not ready to retire. And I love marketing, but I also love health tech. And so I thought, well, why don't I set up an agency just doing healthcare technology? So I came up with this name of Health Launchpad, thinking, well, we'll do marketing, but we'll also help companies that are trying to launch in the United States, either sort of coming from overseas or coming from other markets, trying to get into the healthcare market. And I launched it publicly on LinkedIn at 12:01 in March of 2020.
It's a great time to start a business.
At 12:02, HIMSS was cancelled, and then everything else was cancelled. So I launched literally right as COVID was getting started, and was impacting the US business. As it turned out, in many regards, that kind of a time is actually maybe the best time to start a business. When you've got a lot of turbulence, maybe this is particularly relevant to what's going on right now. Turbulence means people look at things differently. Once they kind of get out of sort of the shock, being rabbits staring at the headlight, you say, like, you've got to move, you've got to start doing some things. And it meant that people were much more open to actually having conversations than they would have been. Companies that were not looking at healthcare started looking at healthcare and said, well, actually, we've got an application that might actually apply to this. So the business took off, and we ran it. We've run it virtually since day one. I don't know that I ever really had an intention of ever starting having an office, like a big agency with lots of people coming into it and that sort of thing. I always kind of wanted to run it virtually. And what's great about the world now is that you can run a business virtually. So Justin, who you're going to meet shortly, and I got working together about a year and a half into it. Justin joined us as a content lead, and the team's grown. And 5 years into it, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. We've worked with over 40 clients. We've 10x the company. We had a great first year, and its revenues have increased 10x over the following 5 years. We've had 50% year-on-year growth consistently. And the work we do sort of falls into kind of 3 buckets. The core is about helping companies grow their pipelines, the sales pipeline. And so we have a number of different ways that we help them do that. The primary method is account-based marketing, ABM. And we have a tech stack that we bundle as part of the services. So companies don't have to go out and get demand-based initially. They essentially can license a suite of tools that we put together and include as part of our service. And then the second thing that we do is messaging and content. That's a lot of what we do. And then the third thing is that we help them with specific problems. So for example, if you're trying to really analyze the economic impact of what your company does on its customers, we can help you analyze that and then turn that into content that's going to help you convert. That's us in a nutshell.
I love that. And when you were initially looking for a role like Justin's within the organization, what drove the need and what were you looking for?
What a great question. The main thing was clients kept asking, hey, can you help us with some content? So initially it was, well, no, we can't, but here's a firm you can work with and we'll manage them. And I just found that to be unsatisfactory. It just wasn't a particularly great way of working. And so I went out looking and I met Justin along the way and sort of tried it with a couple of other people. Some people who are like, yeah, I'll work with you a little bit part-time. I can do it as a side hustle. Other people who are more interested in setting up their own business. And so they did good work, but it just never really clicked. With Justin and I, Justin's on a similar journey, gainfully employed and decided to go out on his own and be independent, and then partnered with me and sort of has become part of our team and part of the leadership of our company. But really the driving force was from a very early stage. Clients were saying, well, the strategy is great. Now we need to execute it. Can you help us with the content? Because we don't really have the talent in-house to do this, or we've got people who can write great content about cybersecurity, but they don't really understand health tech. And so, Justin is a wonderful hybrid of somebody who understands both healthcare and healthcare technology.
Yeah. And Justin's background, I think, perfectly complements you, Adam, in terms of you spent years selling into health systems, right? Justin, on the other hand, was in those health systems and so intricately knows the details. But Justin, tell me a little bit more about your background specifically, or let the people who are listening know a couple minutes of you in a nutshell leading up to Health Launchpad.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Started my career kind of on the client side in corporate communications and marketing departments for a lot of big organizations, and one of which was an independent health system. So was brought into that role to really look at kind of all of the communication function that was happening with kind of this dispersed workforce, and there was internal challenges and a lot of external headwinds facing them. It was kind of brought in to do some strategic work on, really looking at how do we communicate with all these different audiences? How do we reach them in a way that's relevant and is going to break through? I did that for a couple of years and got to know the space really well and really enjoyed working in healthcare. And then after that, kind of made the switch to working on the agency side, where again, I was still in healthcare, had some other hospitals and health systems and some clients on the payer side that I worked with. And then COVID happened. COVID, I think, is a relevant point for everyone. It's in some ways on sort of the career spectrum, but COVID happened and, the agency that I was working for went completely remote, and then started to kind of get the itch to go out on my own there. And pretty shortly after I made that decision, had connected with Adam. We've been working together basically from the very beginning of it. Yeah. And, originally it was, hey, I need someone who knows healthcare and content strategy to help me on this project. So we worked together really well on that. And he was growing the business at the same time I was looking to make a shift, and it just worked out perfect. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
When you were in the provider side, when you were in-house within the system, do you have any moments of kind of recollection of your perception of agencies or tech companies selling in to that provider, and what your thoughts on that were before you were in the outside?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that stands out is it's really easy, I think, on the agency side to come in and make a pitch, right, with great creative and good ideas that like sound great and are really flashy, but like there are some really unique challenges in healthcare that are unlike any other B2B sort of sales and marketing work. So some of those flashier ideas can only carry you through so far, right? It really comes down to the people that stand out in the space know the market really well. And that's where, from Health Launchpad standpoint, all we do is healthcare and health tech. I think when we work with our clients, one part of the appeal is we just know the space really, really well and understand, especially on the sales side, how complex the buyer cycle is. And from a content standpoint, that's really important for us because everything for us is very much rooted in understanding the buyer journey and those kind of cycles and everybody who's at the table and all the work that goes in ahead of time. And that obviously informs, what you're putting into market because you want to hit the right people with the right message at the right time. And it's a really complex space to be able to understand all of that and bring that knowledge to the table.
And Adam, when you had your software company, what were some of those challenges that maybe you were seeing firsthand when it came to selling into those provider networks, especially not having the health background, like Justin is describing? What maybe surprised you?
The biggest issue in selling to healthcare is the sales cycles are incredibly long, incredibly complex. There are more people involved with it. And the types of roles who are involved in it are not, if you haven't worked in healthcare, you'll never have come across them, and situations that you've never come across. So, the average sales cycle in healthcare is over 12 months. It's 13 months, according to HIMSS. So that means that, if you get a new opportunity, a new lead today, the chances are you're not going to close it till next year. That was tough, but that took a lot of getting used to because other markets tend to move faster. They're less risk averse. They're more sort of commercially driven, less purpose driven, less mission driven. And the risks are lower. So, if you screw something up in a fintech company, people lose money and lose their jobs, which is bad. But if in healthcare, people die. You're dealing with things that, in fact, the well-being of the end consumer here, also known as patients. That took a lot of getting used to. I was used to selling into organizations where I would be dealing with marketing people and technology people and business people and then finance people and that sort of thing. I've never been in an organization where the decision makers included doctors and nurses and roles that I had no idea what they did, like a CMIO or a chief quality officer. I didn't know what they did. The other thing which is unusual is that the culture of healthcare systems is a lot more diverse and varied than the culture of corporations. You might have more conservative organizations where everybody wears a suit and other ones where everybody's a bit hipper and a little bit more creative. But that's kind of it, right? I'd never been into a meeting where the meeting was opened up by the chief medical officer reading some scripture and the most senior person in the room was a nun in a faith-based organization, a really big one. That was like, oh, this is different. This is very, very different. And so, if you're coming from outside of healthcare, there's a big, steep learning curve to really get to grips to how to sell to it. I mean, I remember my first meeting with my then partner, the physician, and we went into the meeting and I literally didn't understand the language. They might have been talking Martians. And it took me a good 90 days to get to the point where I could open my mouth in a meeting without feeling like I'm going to say something stupid. It probably took about a year to get over the imposter syndrome because, it's there's a lot of reasons for feeling validly like an imposter when you're coming into healthcare. Doing it for 15 years now. So yeah, I'm kind of over that.
I remember an early meeting when our video agency, also focused on the health and wellness as well space, had a meeting with a CMO, which to me, my advertising background and video production background, that was going to be the chief marketing officer, but it wasn't. And the chief medical officer is looking for something very, very different than a CMO. And so, foot in my mouth a bunch of different times, but that's kind of the way you learn on the streets to begin to understand those organizations and how they function and how they work. So you've described a faith-based organization that you're working with, some of the major healthcare systems that you worked with back when you had your software company. But paint for me the picture of the kind of avatar of who Health Launchpad is working with today to sell into those systems.
So the typical people that we're working with are heads of marketing, VPs, CMOs of an enterprise software company who's selling into a healthcare system. So they might be selling something like an interoperability solution or something tech-enabled service to migrate data from one system to another. might be ambient AI. Those are the types of things some of the things that we've been dealing with over the last year or so. And here's the challenge that they've got. They've got an expectation that they are going to do, in its simplest forms, two things. They're going to build a brand that is going to get a healthcare organization to want to put them on the list initially. So I said, okay, I know these guys. I think they seem to be a trusted entity, and they seem to solve the problem that we do. So we're going to start a process of evaluating. Well, we'll put them on the list of companies that we consider. So that's job one. Job two is identifying who might be buying as early as possible, getting them engaged, and then moving them through to generate opportunities. And so that in itself is, particularly we've got long sales cycles, really difficult. And that's part of what we do through account-based marketing. But at the end of the day, they live or die based on the ability to contribute to the business. And it's the biggest challenge that we hear consistently. We hear this from our clients. We hear this from prospects. We hear this from the network we run of about 200 healthcare technology executives is that the biggest challenge that they have is continuously educating their C-suite on the value of marketing and the impact that marketing is making. And so being able to measure the impact is consistently one of the biggest challenges that marketing has, because budgets go up and down, and marketing is usually one of the first things to get cut. And it's hard to protect it if you don't have really good information and a clear story on the impact that you're making in driving revenue, driving the top line.
What seems to be the split that you find with the folks that you're working with that are, let's say, major software, but they're breaking into the vertical of health, or maybe, like you said, they're out of the country and looking to break into the American health system, versus somebody who's really hyper-focused and their services or product are only going to health?
All of our clients are almost exclusively in healthcare. One or two of them do have some business outside of healthcare, but their healthcare is still the major part of their business. What I found early on was that you want what's called an addressable market, which means that, you can make a list of potential customers. And so I could make a list of software companies that would need help with marketing. Whoever exhibited at HIMSS, that's the list. It's next to impossible to create a list of companies that are going to enter the US healthcare market. So for our own sake, for marketing to companies that need help, that's what we've focused on: companies selling into, who are existing, are currently in the market or just got started. And occasionally a company entering the US healthcare market might find us. And typically they're finding us either through a relationship. They know somebody in the organization, or they know me. Or the other thing is that they Google US healthcare market entry or US healthcare market segmentation, and they find their way to our door that way.
For those folks that you're working with for the last 5 years, what have you seen change in the problems that they're facing and the challenges that they're coming up against when it comes to selling to providers, or is it the same?
The general challenges are the same. Some years the sales cycles are longer and tougher than others. Sometimes, there are more people involved. That's fluctuates a little bit, but there hasn't been a great deal of change. Obviously COVID had a huge impact, but we're sort of over that now. It's sort of interesting that, the attendance at HIMSS this year was probably back to pre-COVID levels. And there's kind of a different energy. It's a sort of a new normal. So, that's part of it. But I think the biggest change is actually in how companies are marketing. I think there's a general feeling of sort of like the traditional techniques, like, lead generation, things like, sort of what you would do. You go out and buy a bunch of leads. Doesn't work. It just doesn't. It's, you're buying junk basically. And so I think there is a general realization that you have to focus on the quality of opportunity that you're going after, not just quantity of leads. And that you need to figure out, you need to become an expert at identifying buyers early in the process and then working out how to engage them.
And even as you're doing that, so much of that purchase process happens before you even understand this organization's in market. A lot of that work's already been done. So I think that's one of the things that we really like to focus on is most of the time with these sales, as Adam said, like the buyer is going to initiate contact with you, not the other way around. And they're doing their research well ahead of time. And most of the time, the first organization that they contact is the one that they go with, right? So getting in front of people with the right message and answering some of those questions and showing you how you solve those problems before you ever have a lead is where a lot of the work should be going.
And obviously you guys practice what you preach in terms of content marketing and establishing that thought leadership and trust prior to somebody engaging you. So it's very much the same methodology. Justin, tell me a little bit about some of the classic things that you're working on, kind of getting your hands dirty with most clients when it comes to building kind of that content marketing from like either an engine and process standpoint or from a what types of things you're typically creating that seem to be really effective.
We talked about the importance of understanding the buyer journey. And, at different stages of that buyer journey or moving through the funnel, the buyers are in different stages of what they're looking for, right? So they might have a problem, but not have fully looked into the solution, or you get later and it's like they're comparing vendors. And what we try to work through from a strategy standpoint with content is making sure that you have coverage on content that speaks to whatever those needs are at every single stage as they move across, right? So you need good sort of awareness focused content that talks about the needs and the problems up front. But then as somebody moves through, like you need really decision-oriented content that says, this is how we compare to some of these other solutions, and this is why you should go with us. In the middle, you have, this is the problem, and this is why this is the best solution, right? So for every stage, what we want is content that speaks to those needs, and then also is customized to the personas that are in that buyer's group, because the needs of a CFO, what they're concerned about is very different than a chief medical or nursing officer. Both of those people could be very influential in that buyer's group. So it's really kind of, we take a matrix type approach in looking at, these are all the stages of the buyer journey. These are all the audiences and some of the key triggers or problems that they have at each of those stages. Now let's make sure that we have content that provides us coverage all the way across, and also looking at different formats, right? So you're in the video space. Video is huge. It's key for pretty much every stage at this point. Attention spans are so short, you need to be able to engage people. But then when you get into some of the more in-depth problem solving things, like the long form white papers and buyer guides are important too, right? And sort of everything in between. So it's looking at coverage across different types of channels, lengths, and then also really digging into the buyer journey.
It's funny. I think about even how people purchase, from us and thinking, I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with somebody that had really high intent. And within about the 3-day period before our meeting, they had a few other things come up within their organization that, pushed the priority, and so for me, that's somebody who came down through our funnel, was basically at consideration, and now they're popping back up to the awareness stage because priorities change and that happens. And we need to, as people who sell into health brands, focus on understanding that it might not just head one direction and to a close. They might pop back up and stay in your kind of upper top of funnel ecosystem for, another 6 months longer than you even think.
And it's not uncommon to see those things like where they get so far and then they resurface months or years later, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's
This week.
Yeah, I know. This is for us on our side. This is very true. We're like, I thought that was done and over with, and we're like, all right, we're ready to go.
Yep. Completely true. You're almost real estate agents of your own product. How many houses do you need to take someone to before they're finally like, I love this kitchen?
But I think it speaks to, Adam, how many times do you have people that like you'll make a connection with and it's like years afterwards, right? Just following you on LinkedIn and like, reading something here and there. And then they're finally in the space where they're ready to try ABM, where they've got a project that they really want to pilot this. And they're like, I've been kind of casually consuming a lot of what you're putting out there for a while. And now's the time.
It happens quite frequently, about 50% of our business, 50% of the net new business comes in that way. Somebody searchers on ABM and healthcare, and they come across us and they watch a video, and then they might they sign up for our newsletter or follow one of us on LinkedIn. And then, they say they're just not ready to talk. And, but when they're ready, they book a meeting and they're ready to buy. That's always good. And then, the other thing that's happened is we have a couple of deals, I think last year, where I thought they were ready to go. I thought they were going to be significant clients, and then they just ghosted us. And then they come back up. They just popped back up and they said, "Hey, look, really sorry. I'm sorry we ghosted you, but something came up in our business. We just realized we didn't have the budget to do it at that point." And rather than say, "Hey, we're going to put this on hold for a bit," which most people do, but a couple of cases they just didn't. They just went quiet, and they're just like, "You don't know what happened." Well, then they popped. 6 months later, they popped back up and said, "Okay, we're good now. We closed those deals. We're back in the mix with you, and let's talk." What I'm describing there is that's what our clients need. What Justin was describing there is like having that, having the right content across the buyer journey as they're moving is important, but also then you've got to put the nurture sequences in place. And when somebody's really on the hook, is having the tactics in place to tip them over the edge, to get them converted. And then if they don't convert, then having a mechanism in place to just keep them nurtured so that you just kind of stay in the brain, stay in the head.
Yeah, so it's so important. In the way you guys have described the personas within the client, this kind of matrix idea, that ABM is a lot more than just having a title list of people within an organization and constantly targeting them. So tell me a little bit about when somebody first comes to you and has a curiosity about ABM, but maybe they haven't gone down that journey or tried that approach. What's the 101 intro to your strategy that you walk them through?
It's rare these days that somebody wants an education about ABM. That was certainly true 2 or 3 years ago. These days, the market really divides into two. You're either doing it and need help doing it better, or you're about to do it, and that's it. And so we have a methodology. Maybe Justin, you can talk about the playbook approach.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of times where we like to start is we call it the ABM Playbook Process, but really it's starting with all of the research up front and kind of building a plan. And that can be a 2 to 3 month sort of process. We've done it in shorter, but it typically
trying to get it down to 4 to 6 weeks, actually.
Yeah, try to get it down. It can be done in 4 to 6 weeks, but it really is focusing on getting a really good understanding of all of the different factors that are involved to really put together a solid strategy that's going to set you up for success for ABM. Because I think, you had said it, you can have a target list and put digital ads out there and then not have success and say, well, ABM doesn't work. We tried that, right? But really a thoughtful approach starts with getting a really good understanding of, on the client side, where do they understand that their strengths and their value lie? We spend a lot of time talking to customers and prospects during this process, right? So actually saying, okay, the people who are actually your customers, what do they think about you? It's great to talk sometimes to people who are either still in the buying process, or maybe they were a prospect and they didn't convert, and why not? So getting all of that, we do a thorough examination of the competitive market, right? And then ultimately that is what drives us to the point of, starting with the buyer journey work, understanding, okay, what are, who are the personas who are in this buyer's group, right? Who are the key decision makers? Who are the people that might be influential but aren't making the decision? Do you have any blockers there, like roles who might, throw up a red flag and slow things down? And how do you overcome that? So understanding all of those different people. And then from there, we do a thorough sort of approach to messaging and say, okay, like, this is what you offer. This is what's unique. This is what's differentiating. This is what your competitors have. So then how do we look at the way that you're messaging yourself in the marketplace? Is that unique? Is it differentiating? How do you really communicate that? What's your elevator speech for your brand, right? That then moves into, a process of developing a content strategy or a plan where we start to build out recommendations on, if you're an established company, this is what you already have. We kind of take that matrix approach, right? And say, okay, here are all the places where you have good things, but here are some gaps. And like maybe you're doing a really good job educating people on the problem, but then when it comes to like that decision making sort of influencing purchase decisions, you don't have anything there that explains why, you're better, right? So we make those recommendations. And then it really ends with a recommendation on, here's how we would target these people from a campaign standpoint using all of the different channels that we have available from, LinkedIn, display advertising, integrating email and all sorts of different channel marketing things. And then the approach to kind of bringing that content to life and delivering that and starting to track people.
Just to build on what Justin's saying, I think what clients appreciate is that we start with sort of big picture strategic things like what are the goals you're trying to achieve in a measurable way, and work backwards from there. Like, well, if you need to achieve this amount of revenue, how many deals is that over what period, and therefore what is the pipeline that you need to create? So we've actually got a framework for that, and then understanding the dynamics of how their buyers buy, converting that into a very detailed practice tact. This is specifically the content that we recommend that you do. Here is what you need to optimize these pieces. But you've got some gaps here. If you've got a buyer that's got halfway through the journey, you don't have anything that addresses their need there. You need a bunch of stuff at this point. And then how we're going to use digital media, like what type of ads on LinkedIn, what are the types of units that we need to create, and then what are the types of emails that we need to follow up and when they're going to be needed. And we get you go from really broad and strategic down to super tactical and granular.
And all of that's constantly shifting because the way that LinkedIn is working and the way that like what's successful, like we're kind of constantly shifting and adapting those recommendations based on what we see working and not working across our client base, which I think is another it's another benefit of working with a partner who's in this every day, because we're constantly, between Adam, myself, some other members of the team, our ad approach is constantly changing. And it's like, sometimes we could say, okay, like this is where we need to shift this, and kind of trying out new things. And we take those learnings that we have across all the different accounts, right, and are able to kind of apply that moving forward. But it's a really dynamic market in that way.
And is there an area of their content that you find most often is either the weak spot or missing completely? That even organizations that might consider working with you might be able to do a moment of self-reflection and say, man, within the content that we're laying out to our prospects, to our potential customers, this is likely a spot where we might need some support.
This is kind of a generalization, but a lot of times people do pretty well at the awareness type upper funnel sort of work. And then when you get down into sort of more of the things that inform purchase decisions, like having really good case studies, doing buyer guide type content, like that's a lot of times where we see that things can be built out. I think the other thing that we often find are a little surprised by is the volume of content that it takes to do ABM right over a sustained period of time. Because, you can even with that like matrix type approach that we talked about, you can have all of that content there, but if you're not constantly producing new things, then you have a small audience in an ABM campaign in 2 to 4 weeks, right? The engagement with a piece of content drops off dramatically, right? So you need to constantly be producing things to be getting in front of people with new and different things, because even if you have a lot of good content to develop, it gets stale, quickly when you're getting in front of people with ABM. And I think that's something that a lot of people can be a little surprised by, is just, I mean, you've run into this, Adam, just the volume it takes you have to always be in that kind of producing mindset, right?
Part of the thing it's been interesting for me is that, having been involved historically in like big global campaigns where you're spending millions of dollars on TV advertising, you put like one beautifully made TV commercial and you get that out there and it runs for 6 months, and then you make another but you're really just doing one and then maybe creating a few versions, and you're running to millions of people. Well, we're not. We're doing the exact opposite. We're running the marketing, targeting few thousand people, maybe even several hundred people across a low number of hundreds of target accounts. What the result of that is that your ads wear out really quickly because you can see it. You can see like, wow, look at this. This ad's beating the LinkedIn benchmark by 3x. And then within 2 weeks, it's below the benchmark. It's like, well, we actually have to do new ads every month and also trying different types of ad units. So what we find is that there's 4 different types of ad units. You need sort of kind of display, which is your ad message, right? Which is your kind of traditional advertising message that sells the value proposition. You need some converting stuff, some lead gen stuff. But the other 2, and these are the units which tend to convert the best, particularly on LinkedIn, are a video unit and a thought leadership unit. So a thought leadership unit is actually somebody is from an individual within our client's company. It might be the CIO, it might be the chief product officer, talking about something which is thought-provoking for the people they're trying to sell to. The video might be a reel. And we find you have to have a mix of those 4 to create a really effective campaign through digital channels. And you got to keep them fresh. You got to keep updating that stuff.
Sure. It makes a ton of sense. I imagine a lot of the thought leadership stuff that you're talking about, again, is delivered via video, via other platforms as well, right? But when it comes to maybe the video ads or some of the other video content on LinkedIn, what are some of your initial recommendations or anything you guys have been doing with your clients maybe in the last year?
You're saying specifically from like a video standpoint?
Yeah, and that could be play out whether you're using it for ad, for middle of funnel, but within that third bucket that you talked about.
Yeah, so I think with video, one of the things that we continue to look at is how are we getting our clients to be able to produce things that are constantly fresh and new. And, video production is one of those things that it's typically one of the more limited sort of forms of assets that people have, just because getting a big full professional video can be so expensive and budgets are limited, and getting production in there is always a challenge. So one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we continue to try to get them to look at new ways to present video where it might not be the most polished, fully produced video that you're bringing in a full shoot for and having a fully edited video with a team, but how can you create some short things from your desk, right? Using your webcam. And honestly, what we found is those videos, sometimes even without the higher production value, feel really authentic. And if they speak directly to an audience and it's a message that they care about, then you can do that. And there are a lot of good tools to be able to use online. Now it's like the bar has really been lowered for, you don't need a ton of technical skills to be able to kind of produce that. So coaching our clients on that piece and finding out creative ways to use video has been good.
One of our clients actually has it's really clever. They have a guy who I think leads their healthcare division, real thought leader. And he does these really clever whiteboard videos, but it's a whiteboard where he's basically, I don't understand how the technology works because he's not writing backwards, but he's basically writing on the screen. And so you're watching him, he's actually describing something, and they're really well thought through the way that he does them. And they're very engaging. And so we said, well, we can turn those into ads because they work really well. But I think, what Justin said is absolutely true. Key thing is authenticity, but you need a kind of a mix of stuff which is a bit homegrown and sort of nudging people to get over that, to do videos. And then in other cases, you've actually got to make, you've got to put them in front of a camera and teach them how to say it, and do retakes and then
there's still a ton of value in really well produced, really good video.
That's a very funny situation, which is one of our clients, we'd say to, they're a startup, they're very early stage, so their budgets are really tight. And they said, hey, you need an intro, but you need a CEO message, like 1 minute long, this is what we're about, that goes on the about page. And so they did it, and they actually hired a local videographer, and the videographer did a good job. And they said, well, can you get it edited? We needed it out the next day. And I was like, hey, you know what? I love playing around with the script. So I did it. Believe me, somebody could have done it much better and much quicker. But, I did it.
It's funny because I think even at that level, or pushing out something via Canva, speaks to the way that video can both speak to your emotions through the visual aspect, through the music, through the humanization of the individuals within the organization, right? Because we're doing B2B, but when you're thinking ABM, you're still selling to humans, right?
And
There's still
people are
humans
you're
that,
still buying from people, right?
yeah.
And that's the other thing. I think that's especially working with people like some of the organizations we work with, that are in more of that startup stage, right? They don't have this fully fledged out, marketing department yet. And they're leaning on us for some of that. But the people who are in the business, who have either started it or are key in founding it and running it, are super smart, right? They've got a great background and expertise that led them to be in the position they're at, kind of pioneering these solutions. And it's like, those are the people actually that are great to, let's get you out there and show your expertise, right? Because they're not buying from a logo, they're buying from the people behind the brand just as much.
I'm I'm laughing because I think back to when I started my software company. I don't remember what we did. I think we did a video, a narrated presentation or something. It was sort of like an animatic, and we had two people in the script. And my partner did the voiceover on both of them. One with like a really strong Jersey accent, and the other one with like a very sort of professional. And it's like, I don't think anybody else could tell, but I couldn't listen to this video without dying laughing because I knew it was him doing both voiceovers. It was hysterical.
Oh my gosh, I love
Thankfully, things have got a lot better because you can do these things so much more easily now.
it. Oh, and it's funny because sometimes people get hung up on what they do or don't have available when it comes to people or locations or products that are even fully ready yet to hesitate from creating content. But the ability to actually make something and tell the story of why you're different can be done often before a product's fully ready. It can be done with the voiceover from the same person. We even talk about, when it comes to showing, case studies, testimonials, things like that, as long as you're not misleading to someone to say, hey, this was an actual case, but you're walking them through a narrative journey of what working with you would be like. You don't necessarily even have to have a customer yet to tell that story. And so it's a very powerful medium.
And it's extraordinary what you can do these days with AI. So we have we do that. We've done quite a lot of AI coaching with our clients on our network. And one of the things that we show them because it was a use case where you went out to Claude and you had Claude write an essay about a particular topic. It could be about, I don't know, where's value-based care today? I want you to write a 1,000-word essay. And then you say, okay, Claude, I want you to turn this into a 90-second script. So it turns into 90 script. You then take that over to 11 Labs, and then you say, okay, 11 Labs, I want you to record this with a professional voice, sounding really empathetic. Bang, you get that. You then import that into Descript, and you can use the stock footage from Descript to have Descript create a video of that. Now, it's not something you'd want to put out, but it's the voiceover sound, the emphasis is in the wrong part of the sentence, and it goes up. It's sort of it doesn't. You wouldn't want to publish it, but if you're trying to sell a client on an idea and say, look, we need to go out and produce something like this, and we need to do it not using stock footage. We actually need to come on site with you at a hospital to do this. But this is the story we're telling, and it's like this is a lot more compelling. And so for doing that kind of thing, it's really compelling. It's really amazing what you can do.
It's a great proof of concept because no matter what, demonstrating or trying to articulate a visual idea via just conversation or via just, even storyboards is tough. And people have to buy in because it's never a cheap investment. And it's funny, I think about a client that we worked with and the idea of being able to take ideas and even take stock footage and now bring them a piece that's cut and say, we could do something very similar to this. This isn't as premium as the product you offer, and we want to make sure the content is elevated to match your brand, to enhance it, not harm it. But it's an amazing how much faster we can get to a place of saying this is very close to what you'll end up with, as opposed to what we had to use to demonstrate 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Totally.
So you guys dove into the ABM process. We've dove into the content creation. Let's talk a little bit about when it comes to justifying the spend, the ROI, and how you even then work that back into, your messaging, talking about that third step of the process?
So the ROI is a real-time thing. If we've got sales cycles, clients with sales cycles of 13 months, they can't wait 13 months to see whether something's actually worked or not, because it can take you 18 months to 2 years to figure out, should they have hired us in the first place? And, so it doesn't work for anybody. And so the way that we do it is that we have a digital marketing dashboard. We have a platform that we use where we're pulling in data from different sources, like data from their website, data from the advertising that's running across the different multiple digital channels. So we can see real time, are the ads working? And if we've got a target account list, let's say the customer a client has a target account list of 300 healthcare systems that they're trying to go after with this particular offer. Which one of those 300 are actually engaging? And so you might say, you know what, this week, 20 have really engaged. They seem to be responding to this message. And so we're now going to drop them into another sequence. And then following week, we say, hey, you know what? We got a bunch of leads that came out of this. These people have actually filled out forms. So let's build out the buying group, and then we'll hit them with a different message. And by doing that, our clients are able to do a couple of things. First of all, they can attribute the impact of marketing to the sales funnel. So they can say, this has gone from being, an engaged account to being a marketing qualified account to being a sales qualified opportunity. And so we're able to help them do that within a space of usually about 90 days, which is pretty, kind of remarkable, because they're kind of going from really not being able to do any of that to being able to do it within a quarter. That's thing one. The other thing is, and this is actually, I think one of the most exciting things, is that they can look at a deal that's in process and they can see the story of how they got there. They can say, okay, this company is about to sign a deal with them. How did they get here? So the salespeople say, well, it's all us. It's like, okay, salespeople, yeah, you definitely had relationships, but let's actually see what happened from a marketing standpoint. Oh, look, 6 months ago, there were a bunch of people that were on the website, and actually many of those responded to the advertising. And at this point, there were 3 people. And then about 3 months later, there were 10 people who hit the website, and a bunch of those filled out the form and they attended a webinar. And then because we kind of identified them, we were able to set up meetings for them at HIMSS. And those people then turned into the sales opportunity. So you can tell the story of a deal by looking back at the engagement over time. And that for a marketing team, it helps to say, this is the impact the marketing's having, but it also helps to say, well, this is the stuff that works. So this is what we need, this is how we need to repeat this. And so that's how we're helping them demonstrate the impact to what they're doing.
Yeah, and sometimes it's that partnership with sales too, right? Where it's like, even before something comes through, it's like, hey, is anyone talking to this account? Because we've got these weekly meetings with our clients where we're going over the data, and it's like, is somebody talking to this hospital? Because if not, you should be, because there's a lot going on here over the past week. Right. So do you have any contacts there? If not, you need to find some. So it kind of works both ways.
Yeah, I love that. The dashboard, to be able to pull in all of the different touch points and begin to, in a sense, rate what that lead is or work it up through. Obviously you have your first kind of advocate or the potential, person who's seeking out what the buy is, and sharing with additional people, and you can watch it happen in real time. The ROI tied to the awareness that's building up and the name recognition that's building up is huge, and not just trying to have some kind of arbitrary attribution to that always ends up landing with sales because they closed it, right? Makes a big difference. Now, 2025 had a lot of different changes going on. You spoke to even how kind of March of 2020 has very similar turbulence to today. What are you guys, from a positive perspective, excited about in terms of solving challenges for some people, and who might be a good fit to consider reaching out to you guys this year?
Yeah. I mean, excited would be the wrong word, but I do think
Excited to help. How about that?
we're definitely excited to help. I mean, I'll tell you what here's the reason I say it is that this is going to be a tough year. It's going to be a tough year for a couple of reasons. The first thing is the only certainty that we have right now is uncertainty. And, there's the macroeconomic factors, all the stuff that's going on with tariffs. How does it impact healthcare? Well, healthcare systems use a lot of plastic gloves and stuff. And so there's a lot of stuff that comes from everywhere else, right? From China and other places. And so they don't know how much of those are going to cost. So it's like they don't know how much they need to budget for that. So they assume they need to budget for more. So our customers are going to get increasingly frozen. That's issue number one. The issue number two is, government's trying to change a lot of things. And, there's a lot of uncertainty about particularly the bill that's going to go through Congress over the next 90 days of what the impact that's going to have on Medicaid. It may not have much of an impact, and that would be great, but it may have a significant one. That source of income for a lot of healthcare systems. And so what will happen is that for some of our clients, it could actually create opportunity. So, if you've got a really strong cost reduction, efficiency, and consolidation message, we can help you actually get rid of half, sort of 5 or 6 applications by consolidating this down to this. And this is what the ROI is. And I think they're going to do quite well out of this. I think the companies where it's more challenging is that if that ROI is not absolutely crystal clear, they're going to need help proving that ROI. So we're excited about the opportunity to potentially help them in that way. So I would say that the types of clients where I think that we can help is essentially two components. You're in healthcare and you have a technology. So it could be software, it could be tech-enabled service, it could be a tech-enabled a device of some kind. And you deal with long sales cycles. We're really good at that. We're really, really good at that. I don't know of too many other companies. Frankly, I don't know if there is anybody else out there that has, particularly when it comes to ABM, the sort of depth of capability that we have. So that's number one. The other thing is that if you're facing okay, how do we really strengthen our value proposition here? We can help with that too. And we can help with that in several ways. First of all, we can help you actually do the heavy lifting from a strategy standpoint to quantify the impact, because that's hard. And then the second thing is convert that into messaging that works. So really good messaging, really good content, and all of the tactics that go around it, and get that done quickly, because everybody's going to have to move. So, if you're out there and you're thinking, I'd love to get some help from somebody on this, reach out to me, reach out to Justin. You can find us on LinkedIn. I'm the only Adam Turinas out there. I don't know if there are any other Justin Metz. And the other thing is you can email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com. So it's one word, but it's healthlaunchpad.com.
Perfect. Let's wrap up the episode on that. That's perfect. If you need to prove your value, or what your value is cost reduction, these next 6 months, this next year is a critical time probably to plug in with Health Launchpad. And I'll plug for you guys that they have an awesome podcast and webinars constantly going on, very, very consistently putting out content on LinkedIn that I engage with. And that's how we got connected here originally. So Adam and Justin, thanks for coming on the show. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having us on.